Hello, everyone. Happy week 4 of the Plant Powered Challenge. My name is Emily. I'm one of the health coaches that we have on our lifestyle medicine team, and I am so excited for us to go into our topic today. It is the perfect plant sources for protein. So, just a reminder for our topic for the webinar today. Um, it's surrounding the plant sources, which was the mini challenge that we had for our week. So I'm very excited to briefly introduce our presenter. It is Dr. Ann Dudley. So just a little bit about Dr. Dudley. She is originally from Southwest Michigan. She went to St. Mary's College in Notre Dame, Indiana, and graduated medical school from Des Moines University in Iowa. She completed her pediatric residency at Ascension St. John Hospital in Detroit, Michigan, where she was chief resident. She is board certified in pediatrics and lifestyle medicine and trained in culinary medicine through the Health Meets Food program. She teaches culinary medicine to medical residents and to community members in our Family Kitchen program. Dr. Dudley is the proud wife of her anesthesiologist husband and the mother of 5 amazing children, ages ranging from 2 to 11 years. Her family has been plant-based since 2017, and you can find the meals and lunch boxes that Dr. Dudley serves her family on her Instagram account at Deliciously Dr. Dudley. You can join Dr. Dudley and other community members monthly at free walking groups that she charters through Walk with a Doc in St. Joseph, Michigan. So that's just a little bit about Dr. Dudley, and I will let you go ahead and take it away for today's presentation.
Yes, thank you so much, Emily. That was great. I am going to share my screen with all of you. I'm so grateful to be here with you and to be presenting on this important topic. So I think that hopefully we have all had a really great time so far in this Plant Powered Challenge. I have really enjoyed the lectures and kind of diving back into really why we're here and why we do what we do. I think that potentially I'm not saying this lecture is the most important, but I'm saying that this topic is something that really sets this whole idea apart from other patterns of eating, right? So plant protein and protein sources in general is the main differentiator between so many different dietary patterns. So the lecture that I am happy to be giving to you today is about the perfect the perfect protein sources, which I believe is plants. And I think that this is something that we can all benefit from kind of going over and keeping fresh in our minds. So I'm really happy to get started. If you have any questions, I am so excited to speak with you either after the presentation, or if you have questions that one of our commentators can help me address during the lecture, I'm also happy to do that as well. So just real briefly, the objectives that we'll be going over today: what is protein and why do we need it? What should we consider when obtaining proteins of any kind? What are the experts saying? So as a pediatrician and as a mom, especially, I think that I like to say, what are the experts saying regarding whatever topic? So I don't want to read only a personal account of something, or I don't want to only look to the media for my answers. I want to say, what are the experts in this field that I'm looking to find more about? What are they saying? What is the consensus recommendations? So we're going to go over those today. Also, what are maybe possible plant protein sources as opposed to other protein sources? And then how can we realistically add more plant proteins into our diets? So as they said in my introduction, I have 5 children. I have a husband who's also a doctor. We're very busy. We have busy schedules. Our kids are in sports. I have 3 kids in activities tonight. So what can we do to realistically add some of these proteins into our diets? So to start off, I do not want to give you a biochemistry lecture. That was probably my least favorite subject in medical school, but what is protein in general? I thought we could kind of briefly go over this. So protein is made up of amino acids. I like to think of those as the building blocks, or even like as the Legos that I often have scattered around my house. What are the building blocks of proteins. Those are called amino acids. Amino acids form long chains, and those are called peptides. And then when multiple peptides are together, or very long chains of peptides, those are formed into polypeptides, and they can have different structures. I'll show that on the next slide. 1 gram of protein is about 4 calories, the same as carbohydrates. Fat has the highest in the micronutrient category. Fat has 9 kilocalories per gram, but protein has 4. There are numerous functions that proteins serve in our body. And I think that we think of protein, at least I think most of us think of protein as something to do with muscle. While that's true, the actual largest reason that we need to have protein sources in our diet is for some of that building and repairing of body structures, but namely collagen, so the connective tissues in our body, collagen being one of them, but also our muscles, our bones, our skin, our hair, our nails, and then so many other functions. It is a last source that our body would seek for energy. So if you're eating protein thinking that it's this huge energy source, yes, it is necessary, but not for direct energy. That's why we need carbohydrates and fats. Our body would choose protein last, because to make the glucose or the energy that our body uses, it's really hard. It's a really complicated process for protein to break down into energy. So our body chooses that last, because usually it's at the expense of storing protein, which is another function of protein. To maintain our body structure, it has to be able to store. It doesn't want to break down proteins into sugar. So that's a last resort process. Proteins also support our immune function. They're important for making immunoglobulins, which you may also know as antibodies, things that help our body stay healthy and fight off different infections that come into our body or different toxins that come in. Proteins also serve as cellular enzymes, so they help support and aid in many biochemical reactions. Cells have hundreds of chemical reactions per second, and there's so many cells in our bodies. So proteins are really important in that aspect, functioning as enzymes. Some hormones are also made up of proteins. They act as messengers, so we can think of things like insulin, which and growth hormone, and some of the other processes involved with our metabolism. We can also think of fluid balance, and those main proteins are albumin and globulin, making sure that we're not swollen. For example, you might think of someone who has protein deficiency. They generally have a large swollen belly. That's not because they have a lot of tissue stored there. It's a lot of fluid that has moved from other parts of their body. Molecular transport and storage is also an important function of protein. So thinking of something like ferritin and how it binds iron in our blood cells. pH balance is also a function. So thinking of things like buffer system in our body, those are also important reasons why we need proteins. So this is just a real quick picture, but I basically wanted to show, you can see in the top left corner, a dietary protein, a protein that we might take in, might be that kind of larger block-like structure, and then it is broken down, and then it can form into other different proteins. So those building blocks that make up proteins, those amino acids, our body doesn't keep it in that big, large structure. It can break it down and use those individual pieces, those individual blocks. So we don't need to focus on taking in certain types of protein per se, as long as we're getting a good variety. We will get the different building blocks that we need to make the proteins structures that our body needs, if that makes sense. So all of those little amino acid or like Lego pieces, they will form in our body into whatever proteins our body needs at that time. And you can see in the bottom right-hand corner that proteins then form those long chains that I talked about. Those chains can then twist, and they can form these polypeptide tertiary or quaternary structures that are used in other ways. So they don't just stay in those little building block forms. So things to think about, like, why are we here? Like I said, I thought this was such an important lecture that I would be talking about today. And I'm so grateful that we're able to be here to talk about plant protein, because I think that it is something that could have the biggest impact on ourselves, our health, but also the environment. And I think that that is something that is sometimes forgotten in this conversation, in this conversation, but that is so important. I think that we would be remiss to not remember our duty as humans to be conscientious of our ecological impact through the things that we are doing on a day-to-day basis. But also it's so important for our health, right? So here's some things to think about. We know that plant proteins in particular are associated with better health outcomes than animal proteins, period. That is a complete sentence. We know that plant proteins are more highly associated with decreased risk of morbidity and mortality, the things that hurt us and the things that kill us. Plant proteins help reduce or eliminate those. Also, the ecological impact, the environmental impact of protein sources, like I said before, it cannot be understated, cannot be overstated. We know that if humans chose to eat more plant proteins, we would have less carbon emissions, we would have less negative environmental impacts. And that's one of the hugest things that we do to impact our environment. One of the biggest things we do is what we eat and the foods that we choose. So could we choose something, like I said, that is good for us, but also good for our planet? It's something to think about for sure. Sometimes in the United States, people are very concerned, talking a lot about protein. And we, in general, are a developed and wealthy nation in comparison to the other countries of the world. Most individuals do not have protein deficiency in the United States. We think of maybe lesser developed countries as struggling with those concerns because they also have calorie deficiency. So in those countries that are struggling with famine, that have low access, poor access to any food source, to any calorie source, they are struggling with protein deficiency. In general, in the United States, we know that our big problem is not eating too little, it's eating too much, right? So 70% of people in North America will pass away from diet-related conditions. Not because we're eating too little, because we're eating too much. So we, in general, do not have protein deficiency, which is called kwashiorkor. Processed plant protein sources. So this question comes up a lot. Things like veggie meats, things like fake meats or faux meats that you may hear people talk about. Do they have a place? I would say yes. And we can talk about this more. But so that I don't forget, one of the main reasons why those types of foods could have a place in a healthy diet is that they are easy to digest and they could be really good for someone who is looking to boost their protein intake in a concentrated way. In a person that maybe has difficulty consuming many calories, like an elderly person, someone who struggles with appetite, or a younger kid, maybe like a toddler who needs to have extra calories. If you're really struggling to get those calories in, you want them to be as dense as possible. You don't want to fill up their tummy with a lot of fiber and then they don't have room for the protein sources. So that's something to think about. But also highly palatable. They're comfortable, things like a veggie burger, chicken nuggets, plant-based chicken nuggets would be something that would be comforting to a person who's in this transition process. So those are other foods I just want to mention. If you have questions about those, I'm happy to talk about it later. Here's a big thing to think about. Studies have shown that if we replace 3% of our energy, a small portion of our calorie intake every day, from various animal sources, we switched those to plant sources, there has been shown to be a decreased overall mortality in both males and females. So this is only 3% of our energy that comes from animal sources, a tiny bit. Maybe think about, could you change one meal a day? Could you change one part of one meal a day, every day, and see how that impacts your health? If you also eliminated egg proteins, which a lot of Americans eat eggs, if you also reduced your egg consumption, 21 to 24% decrease in overall mortality. So overall mortality means all things that kill us, all things that lead to our demise. So we could reduce that by a quarter if we eliminated eggs from our diet. That's huge. Okay, here's another stat that I found to be very interesting and I wanted to share with you. If you could reduce your diet or eliminate 50 grams of processed meat a day. So maybe you're a person who eats hot dogs, ham, bacon. If you reduced only 50 grams, which is a small amount, if you reduced 50 grams of your processed meat a day, so the equivalent of one hot dog, 2 slices of ham, or 3 pieces of bacon, you would have 18%. I'm sorry, if you consume them, you have 18% increased risk of colorectal cancer. So if you are consuming those foods every day, 18% increased risk of colorectal cancer. That is very similar to the 15% increased risk of lung cancer that you may have if you live with a spouse who smokes. I found that to be pretty surprising. They're not saying these are equivalent. These aren't the same, but the percentages are very similar. Okay, now we're talking about plant-based proteins. Can a person survive and maybe even thrive if they are eating plant proteins? This is something that's really important to consider. So here is a list of famous athletes, famous individuals who you may know who consume a plant-based diet or have stated that they consume a plant-based diet. I guess I haven't been to dinner or lunch with any of these individuals, but they have said that they are consuming a plant-based diet. Lewis Hamilton, he has so many awards I couldn't even list them all here, but he's a Formula One driver. Serena Williams, the number one ranked female tennis player for many years, and actually also her sister. So many that are listed here. You can read these, but I think it was really interesting. There's whole websites, there's whole books dedicated to this concept of the plant-based athlete. Some of you may have seen the movie Game Changers. If you haven't, that's an interesting one to see. The world's strongest man, that competition, the man who won it several years in a row, he was a plant-based eater. So if we think about plants and can we survive and can we thrive on eating only plants and do they have enough protein? I would say the answer is 100% yes. And I think that these athletes would also agree. Okay, switching gears a little bit now. You might often hear, okay, fine, you're talking about proteins, but how much do I need to take in? And what is the recommended amount that I would take? So there's a couple different concepts about this. There's the estimated average requirement, you may see that, or the RDA, the daily allowance or the recommended daily amount allotment. So the RDA is seen here on this graph, and it would cover the amount that is recommended would cover about what 95+% of the population in that age group would need to have sufficient amount of protein or whatever other nutrient they're talking about. So it covers most people. You may fall outside of that parameter, but also think of the variety of individuals that would cover. If it covers 95% of, let's just say, adults, there's a huge range. So just because a number is a certain number, that doesn't mean that you have to have that exact number. Your number may be different for a variety of reasons. So I just want to emphasize that before we go and show you what are the RDAs for protein for different groups of individuals. Okay, so again, that 95 plus, even 97 to 98% of the population is covered under this range. For toddlers, they need a little bit more protein because they're still growing, about 1 gram per kilogram per day. Children who are in that like elementary school age need a little bit less than 1. Teenagers, even a little less than that. Now, if they are athletes, they would need more. I have that listed lower down. They would need about 1.2 to 2 grams per kilogram today, or about 15% of their calories. Most adults need about 0.8 grams per kilogram per day, but most of us are getting double that amount. So maybe consider that you don't really need to add more protein. Maybe you just need to swap proteins or improve the quality of the proteins that you're getting. Seniors, those individuals who are a little bit older, they actually need a little bit more protein intake, and that is because they have decreased absorption of some of the essential amino acids. But also they may take in less calories just in total because they're eating a little bit less. So it could be tricky for them. So that might be a group, like I mentioned before, that might want to take an even higher volume of some of those dense protein sources. Okay, now I said that this covers most individuals, but there could be some individuals who maybe would have a condition that would fall into the area where they might need more or less. So I wanted to talk about these protein losing and also protein deficiency conditions. So again, with sarcopenia, which could be a muscle wasting, a muscle deterioration, maybe around age 40 to 50, you may need a little more. Now, that would be accelerated aging. So like I said, seniors need more, but in this area, maybe if you have certain conditions, if you had really severe trauma, if you had sepsis, like overwhelming infection in your body, if you had liver or kidney disease, then you may be wasting or losing protein unnecessarily. If you had a chronic non-healing wound, like if you had a diabetic ulcer, for example, you would need more. If you had really significant burns throughout your body, you would be a person who needs more protein. If you have a protein losing enteropathy, a problem in your gut where you're not able to digest proteins correctly, or you're even digesting them and then losing them, they're going out through your bowels, then you might also need to consume more. Obviously, if you have malnutrition, which would be too few calories taken in. If you're pregnant, you may need a little more. I was pregnant with twins at one point, and I needed to take a little more throughout my day. And then also, if you have an eating disorder, you may need to be really mindful and considerate of what proteins that you're taking in. Now, again, this is just a example of the RDAs. These would be variable among individuals. So please keep that in mind. I would recommend that anyone who is not sure about how much protein they should be taking a day to speak to someone who, like I said, is an expert in the field and who knows this area well. But in general, I also think we can go over these numbers a lot, but we don't need to be stressed out about it. If we're getting enough calories, we're getting enough protein. So I want to make sure that I say that again. Also consider that these numbers are based on ideal body weight. So wherever you fall, or whoever you're thinking about, wherever they fall in these categories of ages, also take into consideration, are they at ideal body weight? Do they need to gain weight, or are they a person like most of Americans who need to lose a little weight? So for example, I fall into the adult female category. The adult female RDA is based on someone who is 126 pounds. That number, 46 grams a day recommendation, wouldn't go up for someone who is more than that. It would actually be the same, or if anything, maybe vary depending on what your dietary goals are. Does that make sense? So, again, there are things that can change how much you're required to have a day. If you're an athlete, if you are pregnant, breastfeeding, or perimenopausal, there's a significant increase. Or if you're a person who maybe, like I said, has one of those conditions where you may need to change your protein intake. Okay, let's get into it. Protein sources by portion. So we can look at the comparison of different types. There's animal proteins. Most of those are listed in the beginning half of this chart, and then at the bottom half are some plant-based sources. Not a lot. This is not exhaustive, as you can see. One thing I do want to say is look at, like, let's just say, for example, let's look at one food and follow it across to the calories per 4-ounce portion, the protein that you would be getting from that, and then the associated saturated fat. So this is something that we need to keep in mind. Just because something has a lot of protein doesn't mean that it's healthy for us. We want to avoid saturated fat as much as possible. We don't want the blood vessels to be building up plaques inside of our body. Heart disease is the #1 killer of Americans. We don't want an increased risk of heart disease. So if we can find something that gives us protein with an appropriate amount of calories and a lower number of saturated fats, that would be ideal. So let's keep that in mind. Here are examples of some plant protein sources. I just made this little graphic because, like I said before, I'm a pediatrician. I have 5 kids. I like cute little cartoon images. I think this is helpful to kind of get a conceptualization of types of foods that we could be eating. There could be high protein sources from things like soy foods, which are known to be beneficial for in so many ways for us. So things like tofu and edamame and tempeh, soy milk. I choose unsweetened. There are greens right in the middle, several greens, collard greens, broccoli, spinach. They have high protein sources. Nuts and seeds, things like chia seeds, hemp seeds, walnuts. Peanut butter is a highly palatable form of a nut that is helpful for, again, some of those individuals that may have a hard time with different types of foods. Nutritional yeast is something that I think is sometimes forgotten. That's a great source of protein. Beans, legumes, those are in that bottom corner. I thought those are also should be one of the things that we eat every single day, even 3 times a day if possible. And then we can't forget whole grains and things like whole grain derivatives like pasta and bread. Obviously, ideally, we want to aim for the more whole food plant-based options, the things that are less processed. but some processed food can have a place on our plates. So I just want to make sure that I emphasize that as well. Here are two plant-based plate pictures that I think are really helpful from the American College of Lifestyle Medicine. I'm board certified from the American College of Lifestyle Medicine. I think they have great information, great graphics, really helpful things to think about and to look at. They also have some educational lectures if you were interested in those. But here, I just wanted to show maybe how a plate could look for a child on the left-hand side, and then also for an adult on the right-hand side, if you were following a whole food plant-based diet. And they offer a very similar image to what I just showed, but I think this is nice to think about. And don't forget to add those herbs and spices. Okay, I'm gonna take a little sip of water. Some common concerns that we hear about potentially switching from animal proteins to a vegetarian, to a plant forward, to a plant-based, to a vegan diet. Any of those things where you're cutting out some animal proteins, there's some concerns that pop up. So some common concerns: calcium, B12, iron, vitamin D, zinc, and iodine. I listed those nutrients and some possible sources where you could get those different nutrients. So I wanted to include that here. B12 is something that is really important that we need. That is the only thing that you can't get directly from plant foods, but you also cannot get it directly from animal foods. Animals get it from eating plants because they have microorganisms in the dirt that the plants are grown in. So due to increased sanitary processes in our food culture, our food habitats, we have less of those microorganisms available to us. So most individuals, plant or animal-based, most individuals could benefit from a B12 supplement, especially if you're in a category like someone who's over the age of 65, but even most individuals could supplement with B12, and then also vitamin D. Vitamin D we only get from mushrooms, which it'd be very difficult to get enough vitamin D from mushrooms alone, or from a supplement, or from the sun. So B12 and vitamin D are two things that is, I would say, unanimously recommended that individuals, especially if you're on a plant-based diet, but also most individuals need to have a supplement of some form, or to be eating foods that are supplemented with those two nutrients. Okay, this is just an example in the next couple slides of how you could meet the recommended requirements in your diet. Is this feasible? Like I said, is this realistic? Is this something that someone could even do? So for a lightly active, middle-aged, healthy person who's maybe around 150 pounds, this is a female, the recommended RDA that we talked about would be 46 grams. So here's a breakdown. I base this is not how much I weigh. I'm not telling you how old I am. I'm just telling you that I'm a female in this adult category, right? I would need about 46 grams a day, and this is how I met those requirements. So here are the foods that I ate and the amount of protein that was in that meal. I had some toast with some peanut butter spread. I added some strawberry slices, some hemp seeds, an orange. I had some coffee with soy milk in it, plus or minus a sweetener if you want that. 28 grams of protein for breakfast. Here's a similar thing for lunch. So a sweet potato with some tahini drizzled on, some sesame seed butter drizzled on. I had some tempeh bacon. That's a big source. Tempeh with a little seasoning on it. I had a salad. So here is what that broke down to, about 26 grams. So I needed 46. Breakfast plus lunch was 54.7. So I could easily still have dinner. I could still have a snack. Maybe I have a couple snacks. Maybe I have another cup of coffee. What I'm trying to get to is there are ways that I could be adding more protein very easily, and I'm already over the amount that's recommended. Okay, we talked about veggie meats. I just wanted to say that again here. We know that they are not whole foods. We know that they are plant-based, but they're not whole foods, and they wouldn't be ideal for our primary source. But could they have a place? Yeah, maybe. Like I said, especially I'm thinking of like a toddler, like a 18-month-old who decides they don't want to eat anymore, and you want to give them a really high calorie source. Maybe they do have a little veggie sausage with some of their meals, or maybe, they sometimes have veggie chicken nuggets with the rest, because if they're only eating a tiny little bit of calories, which is normal for that age, I can definitely say that, they might benefit from some of these foods. So I don't want to negate those or not mention. Do consider that there are better sources. There are better like brands, for example, some that are lower in fat and lower in sodium. I think those are things to think about when you are preparing these. But also, are they healthier than their counterparts? I would say unanimously yes. Bacon, ham, salami, and hot dogs, which are highly or ultra processed animal proteins, they're all class one or group one carcinogens. So they're in the same category of cancer causing as things like smoking tobacco or asbestos exposure. So think about that maybe, and if you could find swaps for those ultra processed animal proteins. Okay, here's another chart that I wanted to show that shows some other swaps. So kind of starting from the left-hand side, progressing to the right-hand side. So from the animal protein source to a processed veggie protein, less processed, and then even a whole food vegetarian or vegan option, plant-based option. So if you wanted to think of any of these categories, just look at one all the way across and see maybe the different options that you have. And I'm happy to talk about this later too, but think about like beef. You could have like a veggie beef. You could have seitan, which is like wheat meat made out of wheat gluten, or the whole food option would be beans. So maybe in your transition process on your journey, can you think about what meals that I have that have some of these proteins? Where can I go in that process? How can I maybe, take the next step? Maybe I can't jump all the way over to all whole food plant-based options, but can I maybe make some swap that are leading me in the right direction? Something to think about. All right. Again, more benefits of plant-based diets. They have higher fiber content. Everyone needs fiber. Everyone needs more fiber. I think that's pretty common that most of us are deficient in our fiber intake. We have higher complex carb intake, so we'll be satiated for longer. Again, lower saturated fat, lower cholesterol intake, decreased risk of all common chronic illnesses. So if you think of a condition that you have or that someone that you know has, and you're moving more towards a plant-based diet, you will have benefit from that. I think that there is a unanimous agreement in the medical community regarding that. We know that the literature supports moving more towards a plant-based diet. Also, plant-based diets are highly associated with longevity. If you think about the blue zones, those areas of the world where people live the longest, most have a plant-based or plant-forward, plant-predominant diet. In case you weren't sure, and in case I need to say it a little bigger, all plants have protein. All plants, all edible plants, all foods that are made from plants that we eat have protein. Maybe they don't have a lot. Maybe they don't have enough just in one food. For example, a person may have to, if you were going to get only one type of food, if you were a toddler and you were only going to get one type of food and all you were going to eat is rice, you would have to eat like 10 cups of rice, maybe even a little more depending on your weight to get enough protein for the day. So that's not going to work. That's going to be too much. So the best thing is to have a variety of plants so that you get enough protein, but also so that you get all of those building blocks, all of those amino acids. They exist in different amounts in different plant foods. So to get all of them in the right amounts so that our body can reconstitute them into the proteins that our body needs for all of those protein functions, we need to have a variety. So all plants have protein. All whole plant foods contain all essential amino acids in varying amounts, but they have all of them. Animals get their essential amino acids from plants. So if you're eating a plant, you're getting them indirectly. The direct way to get the protein and the essential amino acids that your body needs is to just go directly to the source, eat the plants. Okay, this is just summarizing that again. I like this graph. If you look going across, it's different foods and how much of each essential amino acid those foods contain. More benefits of plant-based diets. The carbon footprint of different protein sources is listed here. I put little stars over the ones that were plant-based options. You can see that the evidence supports eating a plant-based diet if your carbon footprint or your environmental impact is of a concern to you. Now, saying all of this, I want to again say that food is neutral. There's not good and bad food. There's just different foods that have different benefits or harms to our body. All foods can have a place at the table. All foods can have a place on our plate, but depends on what our goals are, right? Dietary patterns can change. Just because you did eat a certain way doesn't mean you have to continue eating that way. Maybe things change throughout the season of your life. Maybe there's things that are happening that you need to modify what you're doing. Maybe you can't go totally plant-based right now. Maybe sometimes you are, and when you're out of the house, you're not. Maybe in certain situations, I think it is common that people might just eat what's available. But maybe if you have options and choices to make more plant-based options, maybe this can kind of lead you in that direction. Optimal health for you can be reached in a variety of ways. So I just want to say that make sure that you speak to your doctor, make sure that you speak to your family, and figure out what best works for your situation. If you said, I'm going to make these changes, but I don't know where to start, I wanted to give you a list of maybe a priority list of things to maybe cut back on. So things that would have the most impact for you, but also for the environment. This could be a list, okay? Cutting out processed meats. So like those ultra highly processed meats, we know that they're carcinogens. That's not my opinion. That's data. So cutting out those highly processed foods, working on eliminating deep fried foods, things that are high in saturated fat, cutting back red meat in general, cutting back on poultry would probably be next, and then dairy, eggs, and fish. Now, I said that last because I think it has a lesser, it's super important, but maybe a lesser environmental impact, and it's not a carcinogen that we know of, but those are also super easy to swap out. So something to think about. We know that like plant-based dairy options, there's so many now, and there's so many that are very good. So that would be something to consider. Maybe first if you wanted an easy thing, but it might not be the highest impact, if that makes sense. Okay, if you want to go to this link, or if you want to use this QR code, takes you to the same place. This goes to all of the recipes that are available on the culinary medicine site from Corewell Health. There is a plethora of plant-based options. There's even a 2-week plant-based meal plan, which I think is really helpful for a lot of people, kind of guides you through each day, which recipe to make, and some that can carry over to multiple days. Here are some of the resources that I used. I did want to highlight, I don't think I have a picture of it, unfortunately, but there is a book called Plant Powered Protein, and that is from Brenda Davis, and she is a fantastic, very well-known dietitian. So if you wanted to look up her book, Brenda Davis, she has a really great information. I got a lot of my information from her as well, and I think that that's a really good resource. And finally, I just wanted to obviously I had to show my kids. These are myself, my husband, and our 5 children on top of a mountain. This is at about 10,000 feet, I believe, in Yellowstone. So we have been plant-based for about 7.5 years, and my children eat that way as well. So I'm happy to answer any questions that you have. Again, thank you so much for being with me for this very important lecture.
Thank you so much, Dr. Dudley. It was a wonderful presentation. We had just a couple questions come through. We'll have time for
Yes.
one, maybe two. The one that was most prevalent was, what are your thoughts on protein powder?
So protein powders can help some people who are trying to get a specific protein goal. The people that I would think about is someone who maybe is really trying to bulk up and add more calories and more protein. In general, protein powders are highly processed and often have a lot of additives. I think you have to be really careful if you were going to make a selection that was like only going to add protein. Most of them have other nutrients added in. And there was also just a new study, I believe it came out a week ago or maybe 2 weeks ago, that talked about the heavy metal content of protein powders. And it was especially in chocolate varieties, which we know that dark chocolate especially can have some heavy metals. So just being conscientious of how much you're going to take. But protein powders themselves, really, I only think of like a bodybuilder or a person like that needs them, because most of us are getting enough in a well-rounded plant-based diet. So they have their place, but I think that it is for very few individuals that they're actually necessary.
Okay, thank you so much.
Yes.
All right, well, we are at time today. I want to thank everyone for attending our webinar. Keep a lookout in your email for the links for the rest of the webinars this week. But otherwise, thank you for taking this time today, and I hope that you have a great rest of your week.
Thank you so much, everyone. Have a great day.
Thank you.